Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Dr. Harper. Would you please do a quick introduction into yourself, please?
Yes, so I'm Dr. Shazadi Harper. There we go.
Awesome. And can you just quickly give us a bit of a summary, a bit about yourself and tell us
Yeah.
a bit about your background?
So I'm a GP, but now I really focus on hormonal health in midlife. And that's my niche. I look after sort of women in particular with hormonal balance, but sometimes their partners as well, and also help them with the challenges that hormones bring in midlife. I do think it's a speciality in itself, and particularly around sort of mood, mental health, weight, generally, and raising awareness. I've written a book called The Perimenopause Solution, and I go to many companies and give talks, educating people as well.
I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation because you're the second person I've had on talking about perimenopause. And whenever I open this conversation, people always have the same reaction. They're like, Charlie, you're 26. Why are you having this discussion? But I find it so interesting because no one talks about it. And then when you do dig into it, it impacts so many different things. But before we dive into it, what I wanted to do is I always do it with my guests is to get them to walk us through what has led them to where they are today in terms of what made you start in your career to where you are today. So could you give us a quick summary of how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, I can do a really quick summary. So my parents came across from Pakistan, so I grew up here in Oxford. I always wanted to be a doctor. I think in my sort of background culture, it's one of those professions that everybody wants to do. But also in my background, though, in my family, no women ever went to university. We didn't really do this kind of thing. So I've always been a bit of a rebel. A bit of a nonconformist is what I'm going to say to you. I really loved school because I was brought up quite strictly Muslim, so school was my playground. And I went to University College London and I absolutely loved it. My intention was never to be a GP. Okay, never to be a GP. Once I graduated, I went down the sort of cultural path of having an arranged marriage, but then I became a single mum. And then, as many women do, and many people do actually, they adjust their lives according to what's going on. And, often my father has this quote saying, you cut your coat according to your cloth. So there was
Same.
always a yearning passion to manage hormones because I wanted to be a hospital consultant. And then I think I'm sort of smiling because I'm thinking I got into my 40s and there were a few factors. My mum has dementia. I'm sure it had got accelerated around menopause. I started to experience brain fog and I worried that I was getting dementia. I also saw as a GP that all these women were coming in talking about all of these symptoms, which I didn't really know much about. We didn't know much about menopause, back then. And I thought, well, women aren't really getting the care they deserved. And so, as I said, being a rebel, nonconformist, I like to fight for equality. So that really got me looking into this because I thought I'm heading in that direction. There was also the vanity aspect. I saw women almost overnight become aged, old, and I was still single and wanted to mingle, so I thought there had to be a way that I could navigate this and for it not to be negative in the way that I'd been brought up being told about menopause. And so for me, the reason why I focus on perimenopause is I'm very proactive. I have a preventative approach. I want to catch women before they fall off that cliff, prevent them from doing that and raise awareness and normalize it really. So that's in a nutshell. I could tell you a whole lot more, but that's how I've got here.
But it is. I love that though because it's kind of just breaking the norms. Because I always say there's so many topics we don't talk about purely because in British culture it's very much a case of it's sort of certain topics are hush hush, that are underground topics, or they're just not topics that people are exposed to. I mean, I still see it myself as a disabled individual. The conversation of disability is still one that people, as soon as you meet them, they hesitate. They see me in a wheelchair and they're like, "Oh, can I ask this? Can't I ask this?" And it's so interesting because it impacts so many people. And it's the same, I'd imagine, it's the same with perimenopause and menopause. It's still that sort of secret subject that no one really wants to talk about.
Yeah,
Where
and I think it's great that you're talking about it at your age because you've probably got family members, mum or aunts or people like that, and like you said, it impacts everybody around. And I think everybody's situation. You're not just sort of a lone ranger. There's always people around you, and there's that ripple effect around you. And you must know that, sort of in your situation as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the more we can talk about, the more open any conversation becomes, the more understanding you can develop. Because I always talk about on the podcast, you have to approach everything with curiosity, because otherwise you're not going to learn. And I think that's where I sit there and go, the conversations I always have on here about disability and it being quite a sensitive subject and people having to touch around it. That's why we started the Not Quite Pod. It was all about bringing the conversation to the wider community. Say, look, ask your stupid questions and we can learn together rather than locking it away. And I think that's kind of why I want to bring the conversation of perimenopause and menopause to the pod, because I was like, no one's talking about it. And also, like you say, if you can sort of preempt it and do what you can to prolong the process, then the more we know, the better.
What I would say, there's been talk in the last couple of years about sort of whether menopause should be classified as a disability in a way, which is not something that I think that it should be. I don't think, it's quite the same, but it can be, but it does have symptoms and things which should be recognised, and I think they are now, sort of some characteristics that workplaces in particular need to, sort of understand, adjust, and I think rightfully so. So I think for me, it's more about being aware, prepared, and acknowledging this stage in life so that you go through it, come still feeling the best version of yourself and not feel less of a person because you're perimenopausal or menopausal. And I think, for so many years, the narrative has been sort of that jokey narrative, moody women, hot flushes, it's hot today, I've got my fan with me, but I'm just saying, and also, so it's, and, I think it's been quite a negative narrative. And for me, the other thing that I'm quite a solution-based person, you see. So I like to, I like to look at things in more of a positive light and how we can turn it into that sort of more positive way and find solutions rather than just whinge and moan.
I think it's really interesting. You raised the point there of like the impact it has on women's professional lives. And I think also the other thing I'd be interested to get your perspective on, particularly as you've worked in a very busy environment yourself as a GP, the impact of the type of work you do and the stresses that come with work on your perimenopause and menopause journey and how they interlink together.
Look, I actually thought at one point I wasn't going to be able to carry on working. I mean, I was 42, 43, so it's about 10 years ago. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that I can carry on working. My memory was always my superpower. And so I started to doubt myself. And I used to, it was almost like I couldn't stick up for myself. If somebody said, did you do this? Did you do that? And I was like, I think I did. I'm not sure. I started to sort of doubt myself. There was that lack of focus and sharpness. I became more indecisive. It was almost like my PMS was now permanent. So I think I really did think that I was going to, at some point, have to give up work if I didn't do something about it. So for me, I think also what I was worried about was getting burnt out. I was tired a lot. I remember asking my workplace to sort of say, could I just start a bit later? Because sleep, insomnia is a big, or poor quality sleep. Just saying, look, can I just start a bit later? Not because I was going to get there late, but just in case, just to give me a bit of buffer room so I could start a bit later. But, they weren't very accommodating. I'm going to be honest with you. They weren't very accommodating. And also, when you are a woman going through this and you are not sleeping, you've got brain fog, you're tired, my joints ached, how am I as a doctor going to be able to give to you,
Yep.
give you my best when you
Yep.
come in as well? So I think, it is that's why workplaces need to be aware, because also women are a talent in the workplace. If you
Yeah.
lose that woman, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot more to replace that person and
Yep.
train them up.
Yep. And I hate to admit, I even still think it is. I still think there's this stereotype that women have a negative impact on a workforce, and it drives me nuts. Even as someone who's not, I'm not a woman, and I don't have those struggles. I have my own struggle, but it just drives me nuts more so because I'm like, it's part and like it's part of the human race. How can we penalize someone just because they're a certain gender or a certain way? It drives, yeah,
Absolutely. And
I
I think that's one of the things I think, when I talk about equality or inequality, I think, being a woman, we are sort of on an uneven sort of playing field. And I think women's health and especially hormonal health, because it's like, oh, period pains, it doesn't matter. It's just hormonal, isn't it? Oh, endometriosis, polycystic ovaries. I think that because it's our hormones, and people think, oh, it's a natural phase or it's natural to have periods. It's natural, that you have babies and pregnancies, that they can't be problematic or you can't be in pain, whereas actually these are medical issues. Medical issues can arise from that, and we need to take them seriously.
And also, no one's going to do their best work whether they're in pain, whether you're
No,
male or female. Like,
no.
it doesn't matter. You're better off getting the best out of someone by understanding their situation. I bang on about it all the time. We need to be more empathetic to people. It really
Well, I used
drives.
to shut the door when I was working in the NHS. I used to shut the door and then unlock it and have a little nap at lunchtime just to sort of recharge for the afternoon. And I mean, I now do work privately. I'll put my hands up to say that I did sort of nearly 25 years in the NHS. I now work privately, partly because I knew I was going to get burnt out, or I was getting burnt out, and I thought there's just no way I think I can live that next stage of my life like this, in this kind of way. I was just getting unhealthier, fatter. It was just like almost like a medical problem waiting to happen,
Yeah.
and I needed to almost rescue myself out of it.
Not to dive too much into your GP world, but I've always been curious as well of your opinion of the situation the NHS finds itself in at the moment and the pressures that are on GPs. Because again, I approach a lot of things with an empathetic point of view. Of what do you see? Do you see it getting any better from like a patient point of view and also a work-life balance point of view for the GPs? Can you see that happening? Because at the moment, for me as an outsider looking in, it just feels like an abyss that no one seems to know how to solve.
I think I still have friends who work in it, and I think that I saw in the time that I worked there how the pressures increased. I think COVID, in some ways, COVID did a lot of positives for many other aspects, I would say. But I think from healthcare perspective, there are still some surgeries who are still just doing telephone consultations and not even seeing patients face to face. And I just feel that younger doctors. Aren't putting up with the same that maybe my generation and older generations did, and they want that work life balance. They don't see it in the same. It's, I would say, less of a vocation, more of a job, but it's still a vocation. And I think that unless something changes, and I'm going to say even little things like having a nice room to work in. Now that I work privately, I have a nice room to work in. Having a nice environment to work in. Maybe just even having coffee, a nice coffee, or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
machine or something. I know these things, little things might cost, but actually that's what retains staff. It makes you feel valued, and I think that's what a lot of doctors don't feel. They don't feel valued. They just feel overworked, and I think the sort of the burnout rates and the sort of worries around that are just going to increase. And I was just talking to a GP friend yesterday who said she feels she's getting burnt out, and I said to her, look, don't make any hasty decisions. Maybe just need to take a bit of time out before you make some decisions, because then when we make those decisions in haste, we can come to regret them. But I'm like you, Charlie. I don't think that is going to. It needs a massive, radical overhaul.
And I also think I'm a big advocate for work-life balance, but I'd also want to see that for people in medical professions. But in that respect, I suppose the only solution I can really see is quantity. Is that whole
Yes,
of like
yeah,
more
I
of
think that
you,
too.
so then shorter shifts, less pressure, and that would how that would work. But it's just remembering people are human. I think that's the worst thing. Anyone that's spent any time working in the public sector, it just feels like you're just constantly spinning and spinning and spinning, and you just can't get out.
Yeah, I think it's just been poor government planning when it comes to numbers. They more women came into medical schools, but then it wasn't accounted for in the sense that women may then go off have career breaks for children and this and that. So actually, the numbers the numbers of doctors weren't ever going to stay that static and high. So yeah, I think it's poor planning, and I think it's going to need a bit of a radical overhaul.
And then coming back to your specialty of perimenopause and menopause, can you? Always forget to clarify the difference between the two, because a lot of people assume that actually the bulk of the journey happens at menopause, when actually it's the other way
It's
around.
perimenopause. So yeah, so menopause is what most of everybody will have heard about. Okay, they'll have heard of menopause, but what menopause is just when a woman has her last ever period, and it's signified by having 12 months without a period. So it's sort of what we saw as a retrospective diagnosis. When you've had 12 months without a period, you think, oh, I've gone through my menopause. It's that time leading up to it, which is perimenopause. And because menopause on average happens for women around 50, and perimenopause can actually start about 10 years earlier. So just imagine if your menopause is happening at 46 or 47, which it does for South Asian women like myself, on average, then you can start with symptoms in your early 30s, things like anxiety, changes to your period, joint aches and pains, brain fog, poor sleep. Often it is those psychological symptoms that initially are the more significant ones, along with maybe period changes, rather than it being hot flushes,
Yeah.
and those kind of things.
I suppose it's also picking up on the early signs that necessarily aren't the stereotypical ones that people will hear about, to kind of, as I say, preempt it and get an understanding of it. Because I think my thought process is always, if you can get an understanding of it, you can kind of know how to deal with it and know how to treat it or know how to work with it. So, and I imagine that's a lot of the work you do, is kind of building that process of, right, you might be starting the process. How do we then support you through that journey? So what are some things that women can look at if they're starting to think that they might be beginning the journey? What can they do to support themselves? Like, is there certain foods that you can look at, vitamins you can look at, certain groups you can work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things are that first of all, sort of get in tune with your body and sort of educate yourself. And I think this is learning from a younger age, and we know now it's part of the school sort of social curriculum now that they're being taught a bit more about menopause and perimenopause. I think that it's almost like the things that you've been told when you were younger to sort of eat your fruit and your fiber and your vegetables, and drink less alcohol, move a bit more. I think because you can get away with it a bit more so in your 20s and your early 30s and things, I think you can't really when you get older. It's almost like the path you walk on when you are younger is so wide that a little bit of ripple, one less night of sleep, you can still bounce back. But I think sleep is key, and I think what you've just touched upon about work-life balance and stress management. I think because I hear people say, well, look, menopause isn't just something new. It's been around for centuries. Why are we harping on about it now? And it's because the impact of our symptoms in this sort of stressful life,
Mm,
that we
yeah,
live is
yeah.
much greater, and the expectations of a woman is much, much more. So I think, a Mediterranean diet is particularly good for women because it's got phytoestrogens. And what I mean by that is nuts and seeds. It's got healthy oils like avocado oil, olive oil. I think, movement, get yourself moving, exercising, and resistance training. Look at me, resistance training, building that muscle because you need it for balance and things. But don't set yourself, sort of overly high targets. There's studies to show just this year to say that if older women do just 4,400 steps, it helps to improve their longevity. If you do squats every sort of 45 minutes to an hour, throughout the day, that's the equivalent of 10,000 steps. So, it's not. I want women to feel like winners, in the sense that if you set yourself a 15-minute target and you do 20 minutes, you feel like a winner. If you set yourself a 20-minute target and then do 15 minutes, you feel like a loser. So I think, it's about sort of doing things that you can do, but get going is what I would say. Get going.
I'd imagine as well, it's okay, similar to the way when I talk about the gym. I imagine it's kind of what can you put in your lifestyle that's an easy fix, in terms of stuff that you're going to be able to do every single day without struggle to do it. Because as soon as you make it really, really hard to do, because you set yourself the target of, I'm going to go for a 50-minute swim every day, you're then going to feel like you've lost your momentum. Whereas if you make it small and achievable, the momentum comes in. It's just part of your lifestyle, and that's what you do, and then you reap the benefits further down the line.
I'm so with you on that. I'm about, we're about easy fixes for big wins kind of things. Those small changes that can have a bigger impact. I'm so with you on that.
It's so important because I think as well, there's so much pressure. Like we've spoken about a lot, the busy lifestyles that we live, particularly anyone that lives in the UK, we tend to have quite busy lifestyles. It can then become a bit of a juggling act of how am I going to fit this in? I need to feed the kids. I need to go to the gym. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to also progress in my career. It's a whole minefield that everyone goes through, and then you add in the extra layer of any complications, whether it's a disability, whether it's perimenopause. It's honestly, I
So
do.
that's what I would say about perimenopause. I think it's about sort of get going, making those changes that you've been told about. Start earlier rather than later, even if small things, cutting down on things like sugar, cutting down on alcohol. The other thing I often talk about is just, you know, not to snack in between meals just because, one of the things that happens to women in perimenopause is that, the weight gain or the waist gain around the middle because of insulin resistance. So it's about making those small changes that you can do, increasing protein into your diet, staying hydrated, finding little things that you can do to calm your stress levels down. There's a study to say, just sitting out in daylight for 30 minutes, walking through the grass in bare feet, then it reduces your cortisol levels. So, and that I often think is a quick win, really. I sit outside with my cup of coffee. So those kind of things that you can find, like you said, which are achievable. I mean, at the beginning of this year, I sort of made myself a little star chart, like for children, like little
Yeah,
star,
yeah,
putting these things down so I could give myself a little star or, sort of mentally, to sort of say, oh, I've done that. And it's nice to tick things off.
definitely. And I think it gives, as you say, it gives you that sense of achievement as well. I just wanted to come on as well. What can we do as family members for anyone that's going through menopause or perimenopause? Because I always think it's hard for someone like me whenever we talk about it because I feel as if I can't really do much to help anyone. What can we do?
You can. I think you can. I mean, I think it's great, for children to know that, and I think also for parents to be able to sort of say to their children, look, I'm going through perimenopause. I remember saying to my daughter when I was a bit irritable, angry, and I said, look, I just need you to know I just don't have the same bandwidth as I normally would do. And that's my perimenopause. I may be more tired than usual. I may just not have the patience. I might be a bit more sort of stiff, achy, might get a hot flush, feel hot, and I might sort of get anxiety. And that's a funny one, anxiety, because you can feel anxious even if you're not an anxious person. I never really had anxiety, and suddenly I was getting anxiety. So I think knowing, educating yourself a little bit and, just as a family. And I don't mean to make it like, it can be light-hearted, but I wouldn't say to make a joke of it, but it can be very light-hearted. But I would definitely say that your generation are much, much more on the ball. I've had men of your age message me somebody's working at university in a design technology to try and make a bracelet or something to help with the cooling for, pulse points to help cool for hot flushes. And I think that I think that you are much, much more aware and in tune, and more accepting of different things that are going on. So I think it's about education and being open. But I think the woman needs to also be a little bit maybe open and sort of say, I am experiencing these symptoms. It doesn't make her a failure, and there's no judgment. We listen, but we don't judge.
Yeah, exactly. And I think how do you? Because I think a lot of it comes from, as you say, the person who's going through it having a conversation. What would you say to them in terms of if they're quite nervous about opening that conversation because it's quite something that's quite personal? Again, it's treated as very often quite taboo. How would you go about breaking that barrier?
Yeah, I think sometimes it may even be like maybe they've seen a clip on socials or something that they can share, with their family members, their partner. I remember the other way around. A husband once. He thought his wife was experiencing this and she was in denial, I think. And he sent her the link to the Davina McCall documentary and said, darling, I think this might be a good thing for you to watch, because I think it's like you said, it's hard because you're sort of treading on eggshells, aren't you? thinking, how much can you and can you not say? So I think even for the woman to sort of openly sort of say, look, I'm just not feeling like myself, which is one of the typical things that women say, I'm just not feeling like myself. Even I don't recognize myself at times, and this is what I'm going through. I think social media. This is one of the things I think COVID has been really good for. Is social media and opening up this conversation. And I think everybody's on it. And I think that maybe sending a clip or maybe saying, look, this is how I'm feeling, if they can't sort of sit down and talk about it, and maybe even write it down. Just write it down.
What about, what does the beginning of the journey look like if family members are kind of looking and going and trying to spot some signs to kind of support them to support their family member? What are some of the giveaway
So I
signs?
would say, so say that person has had PMT, previously. You might be seeing that actually she's got symptoms of that, and what I mean by that is maybe she is feeling a little bit more her flat in mood, more anxious in mood. She may be a little bit. I mean, I was going to say almost like a little bit more. Sort of clumsy, or not wanting to drive the car, on the motorway, and or avoiding going out and sort of hanging out with friends and things like that because she's too tired. So I think, and if you're a partner, you may notice that she's not sleeping so well, and she's waking up feeling tired all the time. So I think what you'll notice are that sort of changes, subtle changes. But one thing I will say is women are very good at putting on a front, for the people around them, especially for their children. That little amount of energy that they have, they will conserve that for their priorities, and the priorities will be workplace, children, and often then the partner will get the dregs of it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to say. So I think it may be difficult for you to say, but it might just be you might just notice a change, a shift in her mood. You may think she's not somebody who normally sort of gets panicky or anxious about that. Oh, she's, so I think it's those kind of changes. I wouldn't sort of point out things like, oh, look, you've gained a lot of weight, haven't you? Or this, or something like that. I don't think those are the things that she wants support with. But I think often you may not be able to do anything, but just be patient.
Yeah.
I think small things that you could do are maybe just go for a walk together, sort of encourage her to get out, encourage her, sort of help her with sort of her meals and, eating healthy, encourage her to do the things that we've talked about by doing them with her.
Yeah, completely. And it's I suppose it's about going on that journey with them. I found it really interesting that you mentioned about not driving the car. That one was a really interesting one for me because I always thought it was just a thing that happened when people got older. They just was like, I don't really want to do that. Well, but when you think about it, the link makes sense if you're constantly tired. Although I'd be interested to get your
It's
perspective.
more anxiety. I think they suddenly get sort of anxiety for things that they would normally comfortable doing,
Yeah.
but now suddenly I this is something that I'm going to say to you, Charlie, as somebody who's got older. I never thought that getting older, I'd become a bit more of an overthinker and anxious about things. I thought, experience would make me less, sort
Mm.
of worried about things. But actually, it's sort of the other way round. And especially if you have children, you overthink, and
Is
I
that
think
Is that, I mean, this is going to sound really forward, and I apologize, but I can't think of a better way to phrase it. Is that because it's almost a feeling of like the clock's counting down instead of
well,
you've
you
got
know
loads
what?
of
That's an
time?
interesting point because I think when you hit 50, I think you do have those thoughts. Whereas I think when you before that, and especially when you're in your 20s, there's that sense of immortality. Who's thinking about the clock counting down at that point? But I wouldn't say it is that. You do have that. You do recognize that the clock is counting down, but I don't think that's what it is. I just think that, well, you just think, well, hang on, this could happen, maybe because of life experience. And the world at this moment is a bit of a fragile place, I think.
Definitely. And another point I was going to pull on, which you mentioned there about the tiredness that comes with perimenopause, is I have a curiosity whether that's going to become harder to spot because so many people are so overworked and so tired that I wonder if they're going to find it really hard to differentiate whether they're burnt out because work is just difficult or they're burnt out because of something else going on. I wonder if that's going to get more difficult to
I
differentiate?
think it will. And, it's interesting because I put a post out on socials last week saying, "Is it perimenopause? Is it burnout?" And I saw a patient yesterday who said, "Look, she doesn't she's, sort of youngish, and she's like, 'I'm not sure, is this perimenopause? Is it burnout?'" And, it's only by having a discussion. And the other thing I think about perimenopause is that, so many other great pretenders are out there because periods change. You may have heavy periods. So anemia might be one of the reasons why you're feeling tired or why you're feeling the way you're doing. Many of us are vitamin D deficient, and that can also make you feel achy, tired, flat in mood. I think women are always thinking about their weight. And often I say, look, even though they might be eating um, good food, their portions might be smaller. And so maybe that's another reason why they're feeling a bit tired as well. So there are hormonal shifts going on, but there could be other things like underactive thyroid. So I do think that perimenopause is the sooner that you can, the sooner you start thinking about it and taking action, like maybe just getting some blood tests done, even if they all come back normal, then at least you've got something to compare with, a few years down the line.
What about when it comes to, you'd say about getting blood tests done? What about when it comes to advocating for those tests and advocating for that support from the NHS and from the medical systems in terms of supporting you on that journey? Because with the pressures that the NHS is under currently, I feel as if it's kind of one of those situations where it's kind of poo-pooed a little bit because, oh, we've got bigger fish to fry. Let's not worry about that at the moment. How do you advise clients and people that you work with about advocating for themselves?
So one of the things I would say is you can't diagnose perimenopause from a blood test. Okay, you can't do that because hormones do fluctuate. Okay, and so you can't diagnose it, but you can obviously diagnose an underactive thyroid, anemia, vitamin D deficiency, all of those kind of things from blood tests. I think that, we sort of spoke a little bit politically earlier on about the NHS and the pressures. And I think that um, obviously not everybody can afford to go private, but I think there's going to have to be a bit more of a shared responsibility moving forward, in the future. But I think, to go in and when you're tired all the time and you just explain that to your doctor, try and make like a double appointment, write down a list of the symptoms that you're feeling. And I think that I remember, working as a GP when somebody came in tired all the time. It was one of the things I would do would be to do a blood panel. Also, mental health can affect your sort of energy levels as well. So, and if they came back, then we knew it was more. We went down the route of maybe mental health in somebody younger. We may consider whether it's perimenopause. But I think knowledge is power as well. It also then means that you're thinking, well, actually, like we talk about lifestyle, there's so many layers. Look, if physically everything's okay. Um, then actually maybe I'm just overdoing it. Maybe I need to take my foot off the accelerator. I kind of slightly in a jokey way say, menopause and perimenopause have pause in that word. And I think it is a time that we need to sort of pause, reflect, and reset almost.
I think, as I say, it's remembering that there's more to, particularly like, because I look at work as several different things in terms of people's professions, but then their work in terms of their personal life, and I always think there's more to life than work, and I think that's just something I'm trying to bring into my life, failing miserably, I might add, but it's something I'm trying to bring into my life of like, you got to be kind to yourself because at the end of the day, in the nicest way possible, the world's not gonna be in some respects, so you've got to do it for yourself.
Yeah, and I think you do have to advocate for yourself, and I do think sometimes it helps to bring somebody in with you into the consultation. I think because you can feel quite. Some of the symptoms of perimenopause can be feeling overwhelmed, that loss of confidence and self-esteem. So, even if the person doesn't talk, knowing that you've got somebody on your team next to you, because I think it does seem to be getting harder and harder, one, to get in and see a doctor and then getting the test done. And I think that's the NHS needs to shift its perspective to think a little bit more about preventative care rather than reactive care.
I think that I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that. I was actually going to ask, again, going slightly off topic, because I have had a suspicion that we'd almost be better off going for a hybrid system between what we see over in the US and what we have over here in the NHS. NHS is a fantastic thing. They're
I
just
agree.
under too much pressure at the moment, and we need to figure out a way of have
I think
released you
Europe is
some of that.
probably a bit of a better. I think Europe because I think there's people pay a small amount. I think when they go and see the GP and things like that. But I think you're right. It's going to have to be a hybrid, and some things maybe a little bit more outsourced to become a bit more private or potentially. But I also think it is very much a shared responsibility, health. You can't just expect the doctor to wave a magic wand, and I think that that's why your generation, I can see them making much more, sort of being much more proactive with their health, which is really good to see.
I think the difficult thing with being proactive with your health, whenever whatever the matter might be, is that the friction between getting an appointment and seeing someone, as you mentioned earlier, that's causing more. Because I think a lot of people, myself included, they'll look at something and go, "I should probably get this looked at," but it's going to take me 6 months to get an appointment. What's the point? I'll just manage and see what happens. And that's probably a mentality that a lot of people have. I know I'm like that. People get surprised at that, having spent so much time in the medical system. But I'm very much like, am I about to die? Probably not. Okay, I'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I also think, Charlie, I think the NHS should be there for those who can't, who need it, who need it desperately. I think there are many of us who will go and spend, over time, maybe a couple of £100 over a month to maybe going out for dinners or getting their hair done or doing this and doing that. And a private blood test or consultation, isn't much more than that, and I think it's partly because been brought up with this NHS, that the NHS should do everything for us, that we feel like, why should we have to pay for our healthcare?
I agree. I think my opinion. This is going to be controversial,
I
particularly
know
being
this is controversial. This is controversial. I know.
this is going to be very controversial, particularly being in the disability space. My point of view is I always think if it's something immediate or something someone needs. So this is where I bring in the caveat, because everyone throws shade at me because they're like, "Oh, but you're booting out the disabled community." No, I'm saying if they need it. So if it's something like a wheelchair or someone's about to die, that 100%. No questions asked. There's none of that. Who's your insurer? If it's something that can wait and needs doing, then that's where I would be looking to say, can we look at insurance? Can we do it that way? Because
Yes,
then
yes.
it's not something that needs to be done immediately, but it still relieves that pressure. But then if you're in a life and death scenario and you need something, no one's waiting around to try and find out your credit card details.
Yeah. I hear you.
It's a really tricky thing. We've gone on a very weird tangent, so I apologize.
No, and one of the things I'm going to say, I'm going to lead into it, and I'm going to is you. One of the questions that you sent me was, what do I think about the weight loss injections? And I think
Yes.
what you've just said has led into it. Okay, um, and this is my view. Okay, so I'm a great fan of them. Actually, my first passion before menopause and perimenopause was obesity management. Okay, and I did a little study, sort of motivational interviewing and things like that. And the reason why I think these are a great thing is because obesity causes so many chronic diseases and cancers and health issues. If we can get to it first, we can potentially save the NHS a lot of money, although I know they cost money now. And also for women in perimenopause, when these metabolic disturbances are happening, and women are trying to shift that weight, they are trying to eat healthy, they're trying to do this, but it's almost like it's like pushing water uphill because of the hormones are almost pushing them back. Um, and there's that constant sort of food anxiety, food noise going on, that I think that these are a great tool in the box for menopause and perimenopause management. And I think managing obesity, should be almost like top of the agenda, because we could potentially in the long run save lots of money and save lots of lives and reduce so much illnesses and chronic illnesses.
Completely agree. As we spoke about earlier, I do believe myself in preventative measures are better than trying to put a band-aid over it. I just think, why is it always, oh, we'll wait and see what happens, then we'll deal with it. While I've just given the example of I often do that, I think my concern more so with certain ones of the injections is the dependency on them. Like,
Yes.
having done some research into it, there are certain ones where it is a case of like, once you're on it, you're on it, and if you come off it, you're not going to see the benefits. Whereas if it's a measure to support someone, so like I've got a family member that is using them, but a different, not Ozempic, a different one, and they've had really positive impacts on it. But it's also something that they can manage themselves. If they want to slowly phase it out, they can do. It's not a major problem. I
So
think.
so that's the way I think that's how I see them. I mean, they this week they've been rolled out in the NHS for GPs to prescribe, and unfortunately I say the criteria is a BMI of 40. Okay, so 40 and 4 out of 5 obesity related conditions. Okay, so it's quite a tight criteria. A small group of people will get it. I would rather not let somebody get to a BMI of 40 is my thought
Uh,
process. And I think there is a potential for abuse, for people to do quick fixes. And then, like you said, then, and they're not doing the work on their nutrition. They're not doing the work on their, almost like re-educating their relationship with food, I think. So for me, I have a much more sort of go low and slow, because you have to let the mind and the body sort of um, adjust. And I think we've got to that point because of maybe certain eating habits. Maybe it might be stress eating, comfort eating, eating when you're feeling tired to give yourself a boost. Not necessarily it's just sort of binge eating or anything like that. But I'm just saying. So you have to almost like it's a tool, is what I'm saying, alongside making sure you eat I don't know why I can't say this word actually, nutritiously, and so nutritiously, and also doing the mind work that needs to be done and the movement work that needs to be done. So
I
that's how I see it.
I completely agree, and I
And
think
then
that
you're less likely for the weight to bounce back. And even if that means you stay on like a micro dose for a longer period of time, I'm okay with that.
I completely agree. I think, as I say, for me, it's just about using a tool because I know I often see with the world the way it moves at the moment. It's very much we're all looking for a pill that magically fixes a problem. Whether it's I need more energy, I need to do better on less sleep, I need to do this, I need to do that. Why do we need to suddenly find this magic thing that's going to do it for us? And I think, as I say, to give people a tool, particularly for those that have been struggling with their weight and everything else, I do think it's a really powerful thing. I think another part of it, as someone that works quite a lot on social media, I don't want to be that guy, but I do think there is a huge role to play with social media and the concept that everyone's got to look a certain way or their body's got to be a certain way. That does frustrate me a little bit. And I
Yeah,
say
I
that as someone that's spent a lot of his time in the bodybuilding world, which is very much like that.
okay.
But it's just frustration of mine because I'm like, not everyone looks this certain way that everyone presents on Instagram, and we're seeing
Yeah.
it more as well, not just within the younger age groups, but in the older age groups. There's this shift towards looking great in your later years, which is a great shift, but also putting extra pressure on
And
people that they have to
unrealistic
look a certain
pressures, I
way.
think. Yeah, and unrealistic pressures on sort of everybody. So I think you're right there. And I was reading something about how much plastic surgery there is, and done, and it's only a very, very small percentage of people. Actually, when you break it down, it's a very small percentage, but it's disproportionately the numbers that are on TV or the numbers that are on media, or social media and things like that. Yeah, I know it was in relation to Jeff Bezos's wife,
Yeah,
how much she had done, in that kind of way. And I was just thinking, you know what, that's what's sort of affecting younger people, because they don't realize actually a very small percentage of people get these kind of plastic surgery procedures be on social media, on TV, on on all of that. It's a disproportionate amount, and then they think we should be looking like that, and then things get normalized, or you think, oh, I should have teeth like that, or my face should look like this, or something like that. And
yeah,
it's interesting because I used to live in Oxford, and one of my sisters said to me when I moved to London, she said, please don't fall into that trap
yeah.
of
It frustrates me. It's like I just I had never understood it. I've never understood the whole, yeah, plastic surgery thing and all these different procedures you can get done. I've just
I'm
never
not anti. I'm
understood.
not anti having a little bit of Botox done or a little bit
No,
of
but
this,
as
a
long
little
as
bit.
it looks, as long
I'm
as you
not.
still look like a human, rather
Yeah,
than
you look like you. You look
yeah.
like you.
I'm
Yes, you look
absolutely
like you.
all for it. If it boosts your
Yeah,
confidence and you still
yeah,
look like you, but you look a more fabulous version of you, go for it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's when people, it's the biggest problem with the world is we go to extremes. We either
Yes,
want to be absolutely perfect or we don't care at all, or it has to, or it's again, if we talk about the dieting thing, it's either, oh, sod
yes,
it, I'm going to eat whatever I want, or it's, I'm purely going to eat broccoli for the rest of my life.
yeah, yeah.
It's, I say, it's one of
It's
my
about
things.
balance. It's about balance, isn't it? It's getting that balance right.
It's with everything, and I imagine it's the same advice you give to your clients when you give them the advice for the perimenopause. It's like, I'm not asking you to remove and do all these new things, and you have to do them tomorrow. It's just about, as we said earlier, those little changes. So, can you reduce your alcohol intake a little bit?
Yeah,
Can you do
I'm
a
about
slightly more
doing things in
exercise?
steps, in steps, because I think that you're already feeling overwhelmed, you're already tired in perimenopause, you already got a bit of brain fog. When I first started my clinic, I would want to do everything all in one go for them to help them. And then I realized actually was they'd forget by the time they've left. And I was then getting all these emails to say, what did you say? What did you say? So now we do things in steps. And, for me, I like to formulate a plan and tailor it to them and their lifestyle, what they can do within their lifestyle.
I'm particularly interested because it's something that's come up quite a lot on the pod because it's something I've had a realization with, particularly when we talk about the conversation of drinking alcohol. It's very much a part and parcel of English culture. Our response to, oh, we're gonna meet up over the weekend. The response is, oh, we'll meet at the pub. We'll go out for dinner. We'll have a couple of drinks. How do you, as you say, you're obviously trying to manage someone's lifestyle as well as helping them on their journey. How do you manage that? And also, what's your view on that? Because I found it really interesting asking different people different points of view with the English culture the way it sits at the moment, because we are becoming a lot more sober conscious.
It
But
is it's hard. And when I was growing up, it was easy for me to say it's against my religion. It's against my religion and not, and miss out on also sort of after work meetups and things like that, which are really important for sort of team building, I suppose. And then, when I did start dating, I thought maybe I needed to chill out a bit and just have a little bit, a glass of champagne is what I decided I'd go with. And women are much, much more sensitive. Don't laugh. Yeah, women are much, much more sensitive to alcohol when they get to this stage. Their bodies can't process it and metabolize it. And there is talk about there is no safe amount of alcohol. However, I do think life is for living. You can't take all the fun out of it just to be healthy, healthy, healthy. You've got to, you've got to sort of balance things out. So for women, wine can be particularly difficult for them to metabolize and process. So I move them over to tequila.
makes sense. Yeah, I'll go here. That makes complete sense.
No. So it's a clear spirits like tequila, which which don't affect your blood sugar, which don't cause so much sort of allergy type reaction. So I moved them over to sort of say, look, a tequila and slimline tonic, or tequila and soda, or actually, gin and tonic or vodka. So those clear, clean spirits. So that's where I take them to. I
So
say,
has there
look,
been a sudden increase of all your clients going on holidays to Mexico?
I mean, that's still in moderation. Still in
Yeah.
moderation. I just
Yeah.
need to clarify that you're not
Yeah.
out there having lots of shots and stuff. But what I'm trying to say is, that you can still have a small amount. We all take a little risk in life, and like I said, life is a little bit about living. And I often joke around and say, look, I'm sure I could get a 6-pack, but I like cakes and
Yep. Yep.
biscuits, and so there's always going to be this little bit around here for me.
I haven't said that. I always said, I say very much I spent a lot of time when I was younger in bodybuilding, and it is very all about like, oh, the way you look. And then I suddenly realized that I'm a massive foodie and was like, this doesn't work. I
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
I
It's what
miss
you
out.
find joy from. It's what you
Yeah,
find joy from.
exactly. And I love it. I love food. Food is like comfort. And I think, as you've hit the nail on the head, of life is for living. And I think that's something I'm worried about our generation moving away from, because we are so conscious of everything. So it's that kind of thing of like, we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing this, we should be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that, and rather than do what you want to do. Like, as long as you're safe and you're not doing anything illegal, have fun, do what you got to
Yeah,
do.
and as long as you know, you're not hurting anybody, you're not being nasty, those kind of things. I think you need to. I do think that your generation needs to live a little, and I think that you're sort of almost living through social media much, much more. I do have social media. It is my work. I don't sit there, posting here I am eating this or I'm doing that or doing that. That for me, I didn't want to go down that route, but I did want to use my social media, that voice to educate women, to raise awareness, to give back, because there was a bit of a guilt factor me moving from NHS to private, and my background is my dad was a bus driver and I'm one of 8 children. So I felt a bit, like now I've gone private, I've sold myself out, which it wasn't. As I said, it was about burnout. But so for me, my Instagram and the talks I do and the posts I do is very much about sort of raising that awareness, because I know not everybody can afford to come and see me in clinic.
And I think as well, but I think the other thing I would say to that is that whole thing everyone's got to remember, as selfish as it sounds, people have got to do what's best for them. And I think that's also a skill that we need to instill a little bit into society of, if a situation doesn't work for you, have a look at how you can change it. And I think that's the thing, is like, we've still got this mentality of like, you say, selling out or moving and someone being greedy because of that move, when actually you're doing the best move for you. And I would say as well, you can provide, as you say, the more mental space you have, the better
Yeah.
care you can provide your patients.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah, and I love what I do, actually. And bit going back to you about work-life balance. I think for me, there's just work balance, because work has become sort of my. It doesn't feel like work to me quite
Yeah.
as much.
It's interesting, actually. We were having that conversation, me and my partner, at lunch today, saying that, do you ever get to a point where it doesn't feel like work anymore? Because there's this mentality of like, as soon as you become self-employed or start doing something you love, work doesn't become work anymore. But we were saying that there's always going to be days where you don't want to do it. So it
Yeah, you
then
just switch off, or you
becomes,
just think, I just don't want to engage with it today, But that's also the beauty of being self-employed, isn't it? That you can, and then you can be at 11 o'clock at night doing bits and pieces. So I think it's so much more flexible as well, and that's the other beauty for me as a woman. Perimenopause and menopause. I think that flexibility. Whereas if I was working back in that GP practice, that rigidity wouldn't work for me. I think, I love the flexibility of being self-employed, running my own business, doing this, chatting to you, and all the variety that comes with it.
I think it's really interesting you said about the whole work situation and that flexibility helping, because it wasn't something I was going to bring up, because I bring it up so many times, but it's interesting that there's a link there. I'm worried about the shift we're seeing, particularly for office work, because of the sudden need to get everyone back in the office. From a disability point of view and an inclusive point of view, it's tricky, because it's kind of, they're forcing people back in rather than giving the option of saying, look, we'd like you to come back in. If you can't, don't worry about it. Do you think that that has an impact as well for women as professionals that are maybe going through menopause, and having that flexibility, as you said earlier, of like starting slightly later, working from home, because then it's their own environment,
I
they're
think if
comfortable?
workplaces can offer that flexibility. The funny thing is, during COVID, women were very keen to get back into the workplace, because so much of the brunt of the burden of COVID, the cooking, the school teaching, and everything like that, fell on them. So they were like looking forward to going back into the office. It's also that sort of mindset of getting ready, doing your hair, you getting changed, all of those kind of things, getting your steps in, walking to the station and stuff. So for me, I'm probably slightly going to disagree with you on this
Okay.
point,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to say that I think that everybody should go in 5 days a week or something like that. But I do think there is a lot to be gained by being in a community type, workplace. I think there should be some flexibility. It shouldn't be 9 to 5. Okay. There should be some flexibility in the day. But I quite like the office place environment, I think, for people to go, and particularly I think for women in some ways as well. But maybe, it could be 3 and 2. I mean, I'm more for a 4-day week personally, but or
Yeah, yeah.
just or something like
I'd
that.
say
I think
for me, it's all about like just giving people the option of whatever works for them, and that's where I want to land, is kind of, rather than a workspace or workplace having a rigidity of this is what we do and this is our rules. It's kind of what works better for you. And that, I think, that's where I go. That's where you're going to get your best work out of people.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
And I think because that's the other thing is whenever we have these conversations, I do come across as very much like, oh, remote working is king. I'm not saying that. What
Yeah,
I'm
no,
saying
that's
is,
great. I was happy to disagree with you. I don't think it is king, but I think there are lots of pluses to be had from working in the workplace. But I can also see that it's a little bit of having some flexibility is important, especially for women in perimenopause and menopause, people with disabilities. I think having that flexibility is key. But let's get people a bit more into the workplace.
yeah, I agree. And I think because, well, like it's another part of the debate that I was bringing. I've never understood. Obviously, there's certain roles. Your role was part of that in terms of any medical professionals. But I'd never understood the general office workers. Why we have this big thing of kids go to school and they finish school at 3, but we all work till 5, 6 o'clock at night. What was that? How does that work? And like, I still can't wrap my head around it because I sit there going, every parent is stressed out of their eyeballs
Mm.
because they're trying to figure out childcare. But if we just did this little switch, everything
Exactly.
it's
Exactly. I think there's scope for change there, is what I'm gonna say.
definitely. And I think you're completely right in terms of from the community aspect. I think that would help that as well because also it encourages that time to build and connect, have those conversations with family members about struggles they're going through, whether that's perimenopause, whether it's something different. Whereas at the moment, it comes back to the point we were making earlier. It's like everyone's 100 mile an hour. No one has a chance to talk to anyone, really.
No, it's yeah, I agree with you. I do agree with you.
And then just to finish up, I want to ask, continuing on our little tangents and our putting the world to rights, I just wanted to ask the last question that I ask every guest, which is what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Um, I do think that there have been lots of positive changes, over the last few years. I think since sort of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and I think that it's been really positive for people of color, like myself, and for women in particular. So but I do sometimes worry that the pendulum has swung a bit too far. Okay, but I do think sometimes in society that's what happens as pendulum swings that far, and then we will find that balance in between. I think the thing that I don't ever want to be called, and I don't know, I'm going to sort of shoot myself in the foot, is I hate it if when somebody calls me a cis woman.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I can see. Yeah, I mean, it's not something I really have a view on because I don't know too much about it and not been exposed to it. But I can completely see why that would be a frustration. It,
And I think one thing that I do think slightly has gone wrong, as well is this whole thing about toilets. It's just ridiculous, this whole toilets,
what the whole
and
gender
yeah, that trans women
neutrality? Yeah,
can't use women's toilets. I
I
think that
I have a really easy fix for that, and it's one of my fixes for disability as
go
well.
on.
Just let's just do one toilet. Let's just do it's a toilet. It's a toilet. It works. Great.
I don't like that as a woman, actually. I don't like I don't like the, sort of the unisex toilets, but I would prefer to have a trans woman in my toilet because I think if somebody has made that transition,
I have an
they've gone through a
understanding.
lot to get there,
Yeah,
okay? And I think what's unfortunate is that there have been a few cases where people have sort of pretended to be trans to get into like a female
yeah,
prison or
yeah,
pretended, which has given it a bad name. So that is those are my couple of comments. I think,
yeah. Oh,
be inclusive, but don't call me cis.
completely. And I think the thing for me with the toilet thing is, because I always bang on about the whole paying for toilets in Europe and everyone seeing it as an issue, but you often go to the toilets in Europe and they're very clean. And then I have the same experience when I go to, particularly in Spain, their setup is very much the one toilet scenario of there's one private toilet, there's a door you shut, but this toilet works for everyone. Now, from a disabled point of view, it's one of my easiest solutions for people because they go, oh, but we haven't got an accessible toilet. I'm like, well, if you just made one big toilet, ta-da, it works. And
Actually, might save the queues sometimes in the women's toilet. You know, the women are queuing that far. You know, if we
Yeah,
maybe you've hit the nail on the head there, Charlie.
really tricky one because I can understand the frustrations that come with it, but I just think when we talk about the transgender movement and people who are non-binary, I just think the easiest way to solve it so that you haven't got Darren that's pissed off over in the corner, Lauren's pissed off here, and you got someone else over here. If we just have the one toilet, then no one can argue. It's just the setup we have. Or
Yeah,
in
I just think we're in that sort of phase where we're finding the right balance, but I think definitely the world has moved in a better direction. And as a person, as a brown person, as a woman growing up in this country, I do think generally things have moved in a much better direction. And but there's obviously a little bit of time that we need to sort of
100%,
reset.
it's like we said earlier, it's that taking things to extremes. But then I think in some ways you have to take it to the extreme to maybe find the boundary.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, now we need to scale this back. But I completely agree. But thank you so much for coming on, Dr.
Thank
Harper.
you.
It's been a great conversation. I mean, I've learnt loads. And also, I love how many different topics we've discussed today. And I
I know.
also love as well how many controversial topics we've covered today. So thank you so much for coming on. I will link all of your details below as well if anyone wants to get in contact with you. But thank you again.
No, thank you, Charlie. Really enjoyed it.